Hello, thank you for attending. My name is Joe Bach, and I'm the president of the Rutgers Federalist Society.
And I'm Melissa Lee. I'm a 1L representative with Boston Reproductive Justice.
Today's debate topic is the lasting effect of Roe versus Wade. Our first guest is Dorinda Bordlee, who serves as vice president of the Bioethics Defense Fund. She's a bioethics law and policy organization that has branches in Louisiana and Arizona. Ms. Bordlee received her BA in finance and her Juris Doctor from Loyola University in Newark. She has extensive experience litigating in the federal courts and has published several articles in various sources, including the National Review Online, the New York Times, and the Washington Times.
And we also have Professor Caitlin Borgmann. She earned her JD from New York University, where she was the executive editor of the New York University Law Review. Worked for the Southern District of New York, spent 4 years as a litigator at Davis Koch and Wardwell. State Professor Borgmann has also served as strategy coordinator at the Reproductive Freedom Project at the ACLU for 6 years, and she has taught at Rutgers School of Law, Newark. And she is the editor of Reproductive Rights Cross Blog.
Now, each participant will speak for 20 minutes, and following that will be a 7-minute rebuttal for each participant. Then finally, we'll have a 30-minute question and answer period, moderated by Melissa Lee. Thank you very much, and enjoy the debate. And Professor Borgmann will speak first.
What is the effect of Roe versus Wade? A narrow view would say, of course, that it protects the woman's right to decide whether and when to have children, or even more narrowly, the right to decide to have an abortion. But we have to look at the broader view when we talk about the effects of Roe. The ability of women to control childbearing is what allows them to participate as equal members in our society. And that's because Roe protects important values that are vital to women's dignity and to their ability. And those values, which I'm going to come back to, include autonomy, equality, bodily integrity, regard for others, and women's personal health as well as public health. And another important thing to remember about Roe is that it set a national standard. So when we have rights that are sufficiently fundamental, we protect them under the federal constitution so that they're not subject to the vagaries of different states, and so that women and men don't have greater or lesser rights depending on what part of the country. And so by setting a national standard, we guarantee that women have this ability to participate equally in society no matter where in the country they live. So Roe is about much more than just the right to abortion. Institutional opposition to abortion rights similarly is about much more than simply opposition to abortion. It's part of a much broader campaign to undermine women's autonomy and equality. It's a view that sees sexuality, especially women, that is divorced from childbearing as shameful. It sees women as inadequate to make weighty moral decisions, taking the right considerations into account, or they're being manipulated or taken advantage of, abortion providers and others. It sees forced childbearing as an appropriate punishment for sexual irresponsibility. Supporters or opponents of the right to choose abortion support policies, for example, that would require insurance companies to cover Viagra and oppose policies that would require insurance to cover contraception, prescription contraception that women proportionately pay out of pocket. That also reduces sexuality education, the idea that teens should just say no. And then on the flip side, that teens who say yes have to be consigned to not knowing anything about how to have safer sex and protect themselves, and they can say yes to the potential potentially deadly risks of unprotected sex, they contract sexually transmitted diseases, or to the burden for girls, obviously, of teenage motherhood. They would also deny poor women the means to obtain abortion, but then the same politicians and advocates who support policies that would provide adequate food, shelter, and education for those women. So abortion is only one piece of the puzzle. And when we see the full picture of that puzzle, what we see most prominently is that women are subjugated, not as fetuses in the first place. And I'll give you just a couple of examples of how we know that this is not really about stable fetuses. One example is the fact that most abortion rights opponents support rape and incest exceptions to bans on abortion or to funding for abortion. But even those instances are morally indistinguishable from fetuses that result from voluntary sex. So if you think that a fetus has a certain kind of moral status, then you shouldn't treat it differently when it's the product of rape or incest than when it's the product of any other kind of sexual interaction. So what we see is that women are being seen as either innocent or guilty depending on the circumstances of their pregnancy. And there's a really sharp example of that I like to point out from the oral arguments in Roe versus Wade. By the way, I highly recommend they're really fascinating, and you can see them on the website OBA. We can listen to them in the transcript. And in Fraser lawsuits in particular, because Sarah Weddington was just a few years out of law school when she argued that case. In the second oral argument, Justice White was questioning Robert Flowers, who was the attorney for Texas, and he was asking Flowers about the fact that the Texas ban that was being litigated had a life exception for, had an exception that allowed abortion for women's life sentence. And Justice White was questioning Flowers as to why there should be a life exception if the fetus or embryo was a person. And Flowers said, well, in that circumstance, you have the weighing of the two laws. And Justice White said, well, then what would you choose? Would you kill the innocent one? And I think that that's so telling, because the innocent one, unpacked implicitly, is the guilty one, the woman. But what is she guilty of? And so I think that it's important to look at the circumstances in which abortion rights consider abortion to be acceptable or not, and to see whether that is consistent with the position that views the fetus or embryo as equivalent to a person. Similarly, we can look at the policies of anti-abortion states. States that strongly oppose abortion because they characterize themselves as pro-life, one would think would have more child-friendly laws than other states. So a scholar named Jean Weeks-Jourdel did a study that she published in 2000, where she did a comprehensive analysis of all 50 states, their policies on abortion, as well as how much money they spent to facilitate adoption, to provide systems to support children, and to educate children in general. And what she found was that there was an inverse relationship. The more restrictive the abortion law, the least those states would spend on those priorities. And consistently with that, the more hostile that the state's public opinion toward women was, towards women equality, and the lower women's income was relative to men, the more likely those states were to restrict abortion and to impoverish children. So this opposition to abortion has a particular view of women and their place in society. It's their role as to their children, and equality takes a separate piece. So what is the alternative vision of women's role in our society that Roe protects? And what are the values that it protects? So again, I'll go back to the ones that I listed at the beginning. First, autonomy. Abortion is far from unusual, obviously imposing nuanced moral questions, complex moral questions. child may refuse to care for an aging parent, or a sibling may refuse to donate a bone marrow or a kidney. We make decisions like this all the time. We decide to undergo fertility treatment. We know that this risks multiple pregnancies, and that will pose a greater risk to each fetus, right, in such a pregnancy. We bear more than one child, even though we know that we have the lowest population on the planet. We enlist in the armed forces, even though we know we might have to kill someone. And generally, we don't think that the law should decide how people should behave in those circumstances. We might not approve of how someone is making those decisions, and we might speak very vigorously against what they've chosen. But we think the law is really too blunt and crude of an instrument to be able to decide to make sort of black and white decisions in those circumstances. So what abortion opponents try to do is, right, moral decisions are messy. They're messy and complex, and they try to pluck abortion out of that and present it as this pure and very easily answered question, as though it's somehow and they often seem to be far more fervent about abortion than they are about situations that implicate entities that we all would agree are personal, like war or extreme poverty. So it's true that the law may set a minimally a floor for minimally moral conduct. Obviously, we don't allow murder and other kinds of conduct that we think is immoral, or even perhaps some conduct that doesn't even harm people. But it denies moral agency to transform every moral aspiration into a command. If we do that, we basically undermine the autonomy of individuals. Similarly, equality. Without reproductive freedom, women cannot participate equally in the nation's social, political, and economic life. Women spend 3 decades of their life trying to avoid pregnancy, and sometimes they fail. And it cannot be that when they fail, they simply have to change their plans entirely in order to have a child, when sometimes it's absolutely untenable. Obviously, many women do choose to have a child when they face an unintended pregnancy. About half of unintended pregnancies end in abortion, and the other half will miscarry to term. So they often do, but sometimes they cannot. There are also sex stereotypes that underlie abortion restrictions. So there's an idea that it's women's natural calling to be mothers, and this is reflected very strongly in Kennedy's opinion, majority opinion in the decision of Gonzalez versus Carhart, where the Supreme Court upheld federal so-called partial birth abortion ban act of but as Justice Ginsburg pointed out in her dissent in that same case, quote, this way of thinking reflects ancient notions about women's place in the family and under the Constitution that have long been suppressive. So the freedom to decide whether and when to have children opens doors that otherwise would be closed to women. They can start college, finish college, they can keep a steady job, they can marry when and if it's right for them, they can wait until they're financially ready to have a family, they can take care of perhaps the pressing health concern that they have that's incompatible with pregnancy. And likewise, it's important to remember that women still do the bulk of child rearing and caring for extended families in our country. And so if we give them control, as much control as possible over the scope and timing of the pregnancy, then we at least make it more easy for them to fulfill those still disparate responsibilities and have a more equal footing on whatever path they choose to travel. We know also, if we look beyond our borders, that women's ability to control and space the number of their children goes hand in hand with their educational advancement and their economic independence. Third, bodily integrity. Women have to have control over their own bodies. In most other contexts, the law treats a person's body as inviolable, and that includes in the criminal context. Criminal suspects are protected from forced stomach pumping states can't require crime victims to undergo surgery to remove evidence, such as a bullet, even if it would implicate a suspect. We don't allow compulsory sterilization of criminals. And more relevantly, we don't require parents to make far lesser physical sacrifices to save their living children. So we don't require parents to give blood to save a child. Right? We don't require them to give bone marrow. It's hard to imagine a clearer case of bodily intrusion than requiring a woman to undergo pregnancy and childbirth against her will. Of course, regard for others. Abortion is often painted as a selfish choice. The woman is only thinking about herself. There were these a series of anti-abortion ads that came out in the 80s or maybe early 90s, and they said things like, can't afford a new car and a baby, right? That's kind of the image, that women are thinking only about themselves and for selfish reasons that they want to have abortion. But in fact, most abortion patients cite concern or responsibility for someone else as they factor in their decision to have abortion. So, for example, they are worried about existing children that they have, or they're worried about caring for a parent, or other people in their life that they're concerned about. 2/3 of women who have abortions say that their inability to either provide for a future child or to provide for existing children that they already had was a factor in their decision. And 6 in 10 women say that they consulted someone, usually a partner or a husband, before reaching their decision. And also, relatedly, women are portrayed, if they have abortions, as not wanting to be parents, right? Not willing to be parents. But more than 60% of women who've had an abortion already have at least one child. And the majority of women who have an abortion say that they intend to have children or more children in the future. Finally, health. Because all of these values are so important to women's lives, and because abortion is sometimes necessary to achieve those goals and values, we will always have abortion. We can criminalize abortion, but it's not going to make it go away. We had a lot of abortion when before we had Roe v. Wade, perhaps even as much as we have today. But it was incredibly dangerous, and it wasn't legal. So we know that criminal bans don't stop women from having abortions. And the fact that women went to such desperate measures to achieve abortions when it was illegal shows how untenable the prospect of childbearing can be for some women and in some circumstances. Also, pregnancy is physically dangerous for some women. So women can have heart conditions, diabetes, cancer, hypertension, any one of a number of health circumstances that can be exacerbated by pregnancy. And these women need to have all medical options available to them. The best way to reduce the number of abortions is not to criminalize abortion, but to reduce the number of unintended pregnancies. And the most effective ways of doing that are routinely opposed by the same people who oppose abortion.
Oh, you have 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes. All right. So because we cannot discuss the lasting effect of Roe without talking about what happened to it in the next way. Right. So very briefly, in 1992, in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, some of you may have read in your courses, the Supreme Court changed the test from strict scrutiny, which is what we normally apply to fundamental rights, to the undue burden standard. And what the undue burden standard did was allow states to experiment more freely with abortion restrictions. And so we started to see more and different kinds of abortion restrictions that were permissible under federal. So the access to abortion in this country has become much more uneven. And the women who are disproportionately affected, as always, are women of color, young women, and low income. In 2007, when the Supreme Court decided the federal partial birth abortion ban case in Gonzalez versus Carhart, it injected even more uncertainty to this. And so I'll name 2 areas of uncertainty that it added. When do abortion restrictions, or what kind of abortion restrictions, have to have a health exception? Not totally clear out the Gonzalez versus Carhart, because that ban lacked a health exception, but was upheld. And secondly, can abortion restrictions ever now be struck down on their face, or must they always be challenged on an as-applied basis? So if they cannot be struck down on their faith, it remains to be seen how women can ever challenge abortion restrictions because pregnancy is so fleeting. And so by the time they can bring a case, or if they're in the throes of a medical emergency, how do you structure an as-applied challenge in that manner? So we don't really know what the Supreme Court expects in that regard, because it didn't say so in the Health versus Carter. So since 2007, we've seen many, yet more types of experimenting with different kinds of abortion restrictions that I don't really have time to go into today, but maybe on rebuttal or in the Q&A. And again, the disparity in who can get abortions, depending on where they live, what their economic circumstances are, and so on, is increasing. So I just want to close with a quote from Professor Ronald Dworkin, again getting back to the idea about community. So Professor Dworkin says, if we have genuine concern for the lives others lead, we will also accept that no life is a good one, lives against the grain of conviction, that it does not help someone else's life, but spoils it, to force values upon whom we cannot accept, but can only bow before out of fear for prudence. What Roe does is give women the freedom to choose abortion, which is important not because abortion is nothing at all, but because for the very reason that it's so complex, the law cannot be put in the place of the woman in dealing with those complex issues. And so hopefully Roe will continue to last for many decades.
Thank you, Professor Borgmann. Thank you to the Federal Society and Professor Wright for having me here today. My name is Dorinda. I'm an attorney with the Bioethics Defense Fund. That is a public interest law firm that specializes in legislation, litigation, and media and public education on bioethics issues, meaning the intersection of law and medicine. The issues we mainly deal with from a life affirming perspective is abortion and its impact on women, human cloning and the treatment of human embryos in medical research, and physician-assisted suicide. We have filed briefs my 16 years specializing in this type of law in every Supreme Court case since Casey. And we draft legislation, consult with legislators, that's the kind of things we do. And so what I like to do with you guys, and also I'm also a mother of 4 children, ages 13 to 20. 3 of them are young ladies, very bright, beautiful, smart young ladies. And as a woman myself, I'm very interested in protecting their rights and their equal dignity and growth in the culture. So I'd like to take this opportunity to approach this from a different way, because normally you do hear the debate over the last 38 years as, you know, the rights of the unborn child versus the rights and interests of the mother. Baby, mother, baby, mother. It's happening to you're absolutely right that we have no one's doing the glory of the guilty. These are 2 people, 2 human beings, and they have competing rights. So these are a third way that we can respect both of them. And so I want to kind of bring this into a different direction, not talk about the moral status of the unborn child, the legal status of the unborn child. Let's just look at the lasting effect of Roe versus Wade on 3 different areas. The relational aspect, between men and women, the medical aspect of abortion on women, and then its effect on the legal arena and political life. Okay. So, as the professor pointed out, when Roe was affirmed, when Casey, the Casey decision in 1992, reaffirmed the court, they pulled in the Roe, they did point out the ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation has been facilitated by their ability to control and reproduction of life. And so coming out of law school, when I sat where you sat over 20 years ago, I was pro-choice. I thought that it was a baby and I was respected, but I thought women should have the right to choose. And when I saw this quote, I started questioning, do we really need abortion to have an equal voice. And the reason I was brought to that question is because a friend of mine shared with me how she had had an abortion 12 years ago. And it was by a child of the man she was in marriage. Her uterus was lacerated, so she had to have comfort in the uterus. And because of that, she wasn't able to have any more children. And it led to, of course, she wanted to be a mother. As I said, when she said, we want children, and there are times that can't happen. And it was basically causing a divorce situation with her husband. So I started questioning the basic assumption that abortion is good for women. And so I first asked this question because I really enjoyed studying the subject. This original women's rights advocate who fought for the right to vote, equate equality with abortion. Believe it or not, even then, they discussed these issues. Susan B. Anthony said it will burden her conscience and life to the burden of soul and death. That's not clear. But right guilty is he who drove her to the desperation with intelligence and time. She's focusing not only on the impact on the woman, but the abandonment of the person that she thought was there for her and her child. Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, when we consider that women are treated as property, and we were in the law, it is degrading to women that we should treat our children as property, to be disposed of as things instead. And then my favorite is Dallas Paul, who was actually the author of the original Equal Rights Amendment. After they had obtained the right to vote, they were going for equal treatment in the workplace. She drafted that first form of the ERA, and she said in an interview that abortion is the ultimate exploitation of women. And what does she mean by that? Well, 2003, it was the 30th anniversary of Roe, Professor Marion Blanding from Harvard explained that to earlier feminists who had fought for the vote and fair treatment in the workplace, it had seemed obvious that the ready availability of abortion would facilitate the sexual exploitation of women. Now, this is a different way to think of it. When I saw that, I realized that all of my life, growing up in the 70s, I benefited from, the feminist movement, being able to have that equal voice in culture, business, I consider myself feminist. But when you put in the mix this unintended consequence that after fighting to not be looked at as a piece of meat, for fighting, for eons for women to not be objectified by men, legalized abortion has had this unintended consequence of facilitating a situation where some, not all, men can use the woman instead of love her, and then look so compassionate when he says, it's your choice. I'll pay for it. Very me man. And so, Patricia Heaton, who is an actress and a spokesperson for Feminists for Life, pointed out that every 36 seconds in America, a woman lays her body down, forced to choose abortion out of a lack of practical resources and emotional support. Abortion is a reflection in society's failure. And so all of the problems that the professor pointed out, yes, women shouldn't be bearing all that alone. But is abortion really the answer? Or is it that maybe we should be facilitating, male abandonment? Maybe we should be working for public support of women's children, parenting, tantric, medical, which is what we do. We work and we get these funds into crisis pregnancy centers to help women with that. And so this study in 97 looked at why do women choose abortion. And Frederica Matthews Green went to seven major cities and asked those women this question. And she assumed that she would feel driven to abort because of material needs, getting for the baby. I need to go to school and go. But she said far more significant were problems with relationships, particularly with the father of the child, and even with the woman's parents. I discovered that in almost every case, a woman chooses abortion not because it's her choice, but to accommodate the wishes of others who do not welcome her child. So these are the most common reasons listed in these focus groups. The husband or the boyfriend pressure her. We're working on a coercion law right now to have a posting that if you're having an abortion, we, the clinic, cannot do an abortion unless you are giving us your free and voluntary consent. If you're being coerced or physically threatened, call the authorities or let us know. Parents are pressuring children. And believe it or not, we studied in a lot of cases, even minors can say, I don't want an abortion. If you touch me, I will see you. Okay? They have that right to say, even if my mom signed the informed consent papers and wants me to have the abortion, she has the right to choose to have the child. And of course, that's where we step in again with social aid for, you're going to be kicked out the house. Where are we going to put you? Okay? We get funding for that, and then of course work on reconciling the family back again. And I've seen this so many times where the mother that signed that paper is now quite a story. So that's relational. This is just for relations. Male abandonment. You see that, you know, the hero of the single mother, which my sister is a single mother, I see how hard that is, and they are heroes. But why is no one looking at the male's role in supporting, you know, the women and children? So let's look at the medical effects. So this is a peer-reviewed study published in the OEJ survey. It was done by three researchers at the UNC Chapel Hill Women's Research Center. So this is not, you know, pro-life statistics. This is a meta-analysis of 30 studies over 30 years. And they're looking at what's the long-term impact on women's health. Each of these numbers increased 50% of previous. That's a disease that, well, it's a condition that can cause a woman to bleed out in pregnancy because the placenta passes over the surface instead of up top. And usually that's because of the scarring left by scrotum. Preterm birth increases 30%. So means that baby that you wanted has got hearing or eyes not developed because the cervical damage done early birth.
Oh.
And we had one time, you know, the epidemiology on breast cancer is disputed, whether it's within but it's not disputed that the loss of protective effects can double your lifetime risk. That means that going through the full-term pregnancy that you are carrying at that time does certain things to decrease the risk of breast cancer. And so that loss of protective effects is something that doctors do agree on. But the most alarming statistics are on maternal suicide after the first year. And that's 3 to 6 times more likely. 300 to 600% more likely. Okay? If this is such a wonderful, empowering choice, why is it leading to this conflict? And, you know, I always thought that it probably was because of the angst that comes from, you know, the loss of the unborn child. But the more I think about this, I think it does go back to that relational aspect of abandonment. You know, not only do you have this in this country that you destroyed the life of your child, but you've been left with it alone. That is a lonely place to be. And so it looks like whether it's legal or not, it's just something that's taking women that always wants to. The legal effects are, well, even intellectuals from the beginning, and up to Pat Holmstrom, who's a Harvard Law Professor, Obama advisor, they recognized that as it was written in 1973, Roe v. Wade was often a model of good reason, and conservatives have been correct to criticize. The court failed to root the abortion right in either the text of the Constitution or its own precedent. Okay? So here's where I'm going to have a focus. We can argue and have good arguments on both sides about whether abortion empowers women, hurts women, helps society, hurts society. That debate, and it is a relevant and important debate, should be happening in the democratic process. Okay? It should be happening in the state legislature. You know, conjuring it from thin air as a fundamental right, and then cutting off these valid debates on how we're going to resolve this is not consistent with our federalist system of government. It is also having the effect of roiling our politics. I mean, every single presidential election, every single open Supreme Court case. We're not looking, initially at the merits of the person, their ability to be a jurist. What's the first thing in subtext all along? How do they vote on this issue? This is our legislature. This is the judicial body. And that is why in 1997, in the case of Washington versus Rutgers, they learned from the mistake. A case had come up to them that physician-assisted suicide was a liberty interest. It should be protected as a fundamental right. Dr. Borgmann, my ability to call Dr. Borgmann should be something that the state can't say, Dr. Borgmann, you do believe. And so there's that question, life and death. Is this a fundamental right? And the Rutgers court said, it's not. This is not rooted in our tradition. This is not rooted in our Constitution. This is something that you will have to deal with in that messy thing called democracy in the state, okay? It's not perfect, it's not pretty, and nobody's going to be happy with every single aspect of it, okay? But that's America, okay? And so we should be looking at these very important issues, how it affects our relationships, how it affects our bodies, our families, our culture, our political life, and realize that let's bring that back to where the lasting effect can be you, as a lawyer, influencing that, whichever way you do that from. The lasting effect that you, as people that others will look to for policy decisions and otherwise, should be able to impact as a part of the society without being one of these non-people on the court. So that's what overruling Roe means. To let you all know, nobody's going to jail. And by the way, you could never advocate. And I don't think that any other creed or law has ever criminalized a woman. They always criminalize the abortion provider. Only the abortion provider. Because we view women as that second victim of abortion. She's the one that's left with this untenable condition, just like we would be answering recognized. And so overruling Roe simply means one thing. This issue goes back to the state. Okay, this issue goes back to the state. And this difficult issue of abortion won't be decided by judicial fiat. It will be back in the military side. So just quickly, these are some of the policies that we advocate for. The informed consent for abortion, so that when we can see the medical risk, short-term and long-term, and also see information about the developing unborn child. What does my baby look like right now? How far along am I? I should know these things, Funding for the care centers and outreach, like I said, in Louisiana we get $1.5 million, so that when we can get pantry services and parenting services, that's in addition to your regular federal services. Ultrasound, so that you can have the same medical information that the doctor has. Coercion warning, so that you are truly letting someone know, I am here for you. If you're being forced, I know you're in a tough situation, but we can do this. Okay, we can get through this together. And then of course there's the Fatherhood Initiative, which they're kind of a joke thing for everybody gets together and say, yeah, let's be fathers. But when no one even looks to, what's the father doing? He has a legal duty to support that child, okay? So to look to the state constantly is to say, you're off the hook. You can use this woman and then go on your married carefree way, okay? When are we going to start holding the men accountable for this as well? We are in this together. So that's my main presentation. I look forward to addressing some of your questions in the next class. Thank you.
I will now have our rebuttal period. Yes, 7 minutes.
Wow.
But you can stop earlier.
All right, thank you. And well, I'll use two of my unanticipated minutes to thank this Reproductive Justice and Federalist Society for inviting me. I am great that you're having this debate. So, Ms. Bordlee and I, as she pointed out, agree on several things, and I hope I'll have time to address some of those in my rebuttal. But I do want to point out that that she opened with saying that she didn't want to talk about the moral or legal status of the unborn child in the remarks. And I hope that perhaps in the rebuttal or during the Q&A that she will address that. Because you cannot discuss the issue of abortion without addressing the moral aspect. You can't avoid it. Everything rides on it. Right? Whether or not we can ban abortion completely, whether or not it's permissible to allow certain exceptions, depends on how we view the moral status of the fetus. And I've actually written an article about this called The Meaning of Life, Belief and Reason in the Abortion Debate, where I take both liberals and conservatives to task for suggesting that that question doesn't have to be answered, that either we can leave it to people to decide, and that somehow we don't have to get at that question, or we're avoiding that. So, for example, when Ms. Bordlee says, this should be happening in the democratic process, that can't happen if the fetus is equivalent to a person, right? So when this country decided, finally, was morally compelled to acknowledge that slaves were persons, it could no longer leave it to the state to decide whether to allow slavery. So if an embryo or fetus is a person protected under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, we cannot just let states, as Justice Carter would say, play fast and loose with those lives, right? They're protected under the federal Constitution. States outlaw murder, right? We can't let them decide to allow murder in the case of abortion. That would violate equal protection among us. Similarly, no jail time for abortion. In fact, free will law did criminalize, in many instances, the woman's conduct. Often, it's true, she wasn't prosecuted, and the reason is that they used threat of prosecution to get women to testify against abortion providers. But all that shows is that this kind of selective prosecution means that people don't really regard abortion as murder. When teenagers, desperate teenagers, dump their babies, their newborn babies, in the trash or the toilet, we may feel sympathy for their plight, but we condemn that as murder. They're prosecuted for murder. So, the fact that we don't think that women should be punished shows that it's not seen as murder. It's very important to set straight exactly what the different camps think about the sex of the fetus. I would say that what seems to fit most people's views is that the gradualist view of life. We think even embryos have moral status of some kind, but we think it's far from the same as the sex of a person, and it morally increases growth rate. And the growth rate will just simply that kind of disease moral status. I agree, absolutely, we should not facilitate men sexually affected women. We should try to enforce as best we can them to pay child support. We know that men do not pay child support. The idea that if we ban abortion and women have all these unintended pregnancies, that somehow men are going to step forward and pay child support women is not evidenced by what we already know, right? The men who are going to do it are going to do it anyway, and they're probably supporting their partners already. But the idea that banning abortion is going to solve it is not clear. I also agree that we should work for public support of women. Their ability to bear children, their ability to have education. But we need policies to do that. We can't rely on so-called crisis pregnancy centers. If they want to provide financial support to help women bear children that they want to have, that's great. But we need policies that enforce those kinds of things. Policies that put money where women in poverty need it, right? And the programs that they need. And unfortunately, anti-abortion rights politicians, perhaps not most poorly, which is great, but the politicians that enact anti-abortion laws do not support those kinds of policies and those kinds of things. Do teenagers have the right to choose to have a child? Yes, absolutely. And when I worked at the ACLU, we defended teens whether they wanted to have a child or whether they wanted to have an abortion. But it seems strange to say that we should not force a teenager to have an abortion, but that parents would force a teenager to force a teenager to have an abortion. Right? And in fact, there are parents, especially their teens, who have a baby. Oh, it would be great to have another baby in their house, right? Or just throw them out of the house and refuse to consent to the abortion, right? So they are often consigned to having children that they wouldn't have. So why would we force one and not the other? As Daniel said, you're entitled to know the opinion, but not your own facts. And the fact that Ms.
authorities who are on the board do not represent a scientific consensus about the medical risk. Abortion is an incredibly safe procedure. It is one of the safest procedures, medical procedures that a woman can have, particularly in the first trimester when nearly 90% of women have abortion. There is no evidence that abortion causes mental health. Justice Kennedy essentially admitted that in Gonzalez versus Carhart, and the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association agree with that. The National Institute of Cancer has also discredited thoroughly any link between breast cancer. So it doesn't work to cite extreme studies that are often created by organizations that exist, particularly with an ideological motivation, to find particular facts that are at the fringe of the scientific community. We don't do that in other contexts, and we shouldn't do it in the context of abortion. But again, there's much we agree on in terms of policies that we should do to help women have children. There are a lot of women who would have children if they had financial support for it, and those women should not have to have abortion. I fully agree, but banning abortion is not a solution. We should enable them financially to have the children that they want. Thank you all for hanging in with us. I'm glad you brought up, I'm glad that the professor brought up the moral status of the unborn child, because although my main argument has been often disregarded arguments regarding the impact on women in our legal system, I wanted to bring those to the forefront. But of course, you're absolutely right. We cannot talk about abortion because if there was no moral, if there was no biological fact that this is another unique and unrepeatable human being, then we would not be having these debates. But we are having these debates because we're dealing with two human beings. So the question is, because developmental biology, this is a real officer of the court, but this is a human being. The question is, how do we report that in the law, and whether or how do we do that? Again, that has to be done in the democratic process. Some people will find that the fetus is not a child or a person. Put your evidence on. Let's talk about personhood, whether you're a person under the 14th Amendment. Again, that's determination of, we recognize that fetal homicide laws in the 30 states recognize that when Scott Peterson killed his wife and their unborn child, he was charged with 2 murders. Okay? So why is the unborn child protectable in one situation under the law, but completely unprotected? Okay, so Roe has created that fiction in the law, and that needs to be consistent. Ultimately, if we were to address this question and go straight to the heart of the moral and legal status of the unborn child, we're looking at a constitutional amendment, whether it's for the fundamental right to terminate your pregnancy, or whether it's to protect the life of the unborn child and to give them social support to get it through. And I want to talk about courts and other things, and the courts social pregnancy. I have coaching here, okay? And I want to talk about mental illness, so both sides of the debate. And I've had opportunities to go to Washington, D.C., and I haven't taken it because I have children, okay? My forced parenthood of these children does not allow me to just destroy them and devastate them. As human beings in civilization, we're going to be in situations where we have to keep their freedom. That is an equal right, equal humanity, where we are in so many places. You might have some unwanted law professors, not professors, but there might be an unwanted person in your life, and because they're unwanted, maybe holding you back, and you have to get around that somehow. The destruction of another human life should never be the answer to a societal or personal problem. I believe in the rebuttal, the medical defense that I put up there, we feel about the UNC Chapel Hill women's research. Okay? That's not a select organization. UNC Chapel Hill provides abortion and contraception routines. The researchers there are world class. And they looked at, the UNC Women's Research Center looked at studies that were done by others, only including peer-reviewed studies. Okay, so the numbers are there. The numbers are the numbers. You're right. The facts are the facts. And that's what they are. Now, I'm glad you brought up the recent ACA study on mental health. And I read the headline of last week. Abortion not linked to mental health problems. So I immediately had about trying to send that study up and read it. And here's the measure. They studied women who had had abortions within the first year with whether those women, or what percentage of those women, sought the services of a psychiatrist within that first year. Okay? Now, if a woman feels like she's in a situation where she can't, afford to have a child, or is not supported enough, we all need to go to psychiatrists, But in the first year or something of a trauma, I listened to Katrina, our post-traumatic stress analysis. You're just trying to get a grip, and so that is a really tough thing to do, to make a conclusion that abortion does not result in any kind of mental health risk when visiting the psychiatrist in the first year is measured. The other studies, and Dr. Dorinda will see it, that show that suicide, not suicide attempts, actual suicide within the first year are 300 to 600% more likely. Okay, you can't argue with someone is dead because you just can't. And so we need to, as women who care for other women, and for our society, and our families, and our political systems, look at the facts. Bring it out of the judicial chaos world, and let's put these good arguments on the table. You can get lasting impact as well. You can make a decision. Thank you very much.
We're now going to go to our question and answer period. We'll conclude around 2:10, and Mr. Lee will conduct the questions and answers. Please, when asking the question, be brief and state your name and flashes. Thank you.
Well, the informed consent laws that we draft and advocate for and defend in the court, and believe it or not, informed consent for abortion laws are opposed by women's rights groups. In fact, this is all in the court, and laws established in cases about that. But giving women information on the short-term and long-term medical effects does give her the reason, the ability to say that. We even put in the and this is up to the State Department of Health as to what information to be included. So if there's something that does not have a link, and it's a myth that it's thought that this, but studies don't support that, that information can be in there as well. But the fact is, and the professor is right, we can't talk about it as with the consumer because we have also medically supported information that the decision you're making here is impacting your human offspring. Okay, and so in the beginning, before we had ultrasound technology, and women were told it's just a blob of fetal tissue, okay, that is deceptive. That is paternalism. So we have to let you know, you're 12 weeks along in your pregnancy, and if you want to look at this book, nobody's going to force you to look at it, but here it is, and you can see what a 12-week-old unborn child looks like. Okay, this is offered to you. It's required to be given to you at least 24 hours beforehand. Nobody's going to sit you there and make you read it. But it gives you the information that you can make an informed decision.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think I sometimes when Bordlee tells me, I can't tell whether she actually would support total abortion bans or not, because she sounds like you support women's autonomy to make these decisions. You just want to give them information, and I think that's very consistent with leading into the democratic process. If that it should be left to the democratic process, then why not let the woman make their own decision? And the problem with abortion rights advocates do not oppose informed medical informed consent that talks about the risk. In fact, informed consent laws that are really about moral persuasion, trying to get women not to have abortions, are not traditional medical informed consent laws. And when they have tried to sneak in so-called medical information about things like risk of breast cancer, those have been struck down because under Planned Parenthood Casey, the state can try to dissuade a woman from having an abortion, but they cannot do so in a misleading way. It has to be non-misleading, unbiased information. And so because that risk has not been established, those have been struck down as unconstitutional. So absolutely. And by the way, why do we not also give them the moral information and the medical information about unintended pregnancy, right? I mean, talk about mental trauma. There's been no link proven of lasting emotional harm from abortion. But we know that unintended pregnancies that have to be carried to term, a woman would prefer an abortion, is highly stressful and traumatic for women. So to force that, we ought to talk about both sides of the coin, and also, childbirth and pregnancy are much more dangerous.
Because once you're pregnant, contraception will help you. That's all. There's many issues that we can address as to how to make our society better. But on a debate of the lasting impact of Roe, we're talking about what to do once you're pregnant. And contraception won't help you at that point. So if you want to have another debate on sexual activity and that's a completely different debate. But when you're dealing with a woman who is pregnant, what do we do now? Okay, right now, and so let me be clear, legalized abortion has been imposed by the court. Okay? I can't remember how many state laws were struck down. Okay? So when you're in a situation where you have legalized abortion being imposed by the court, these incremental measures to give women information, and it is unbiased medical information. And by the way, abortion, breast cancer links are in several states informed consent material, because it is undisputed that the lawful protective effect isn't there. So that's not been struck down. I've drafted it and I've worked with the Department of Health. But since we have Roe, what we do is try, whether it's legal or not, you should have the information to where this is just not desirable. If you think it's desirable in this regime, why fight us on giving this information to women? Why are we taught by women's rights groups on clinic regulations to have sanitary conditions in abortion clinics? So you don't have what happened in Philadelphia with Dr. Gossman. Why is it that we are taught across the board on reasonable, common sense, common ground proposals?
Question I don't know. But obviously, as Bordlee demonstrates, it's hard to predict on gender grounds what position a person is going to have. I don't know.
I wish I had this study, and I could give you a name, I'll send it to you. But when they do, these political, after I've voted, people ask you certain questions: do you support legalized abortion or not? One of the studies I have shows that the biggest supporter of legalized abortion is men between 18 and 23. And that makes sense.
I know that in time to cross my mind when my fiance and then we see our first love on our always think along that line, oh, if she was pregnant, we were going to have a child. You know, it's like, oh, because we have, you know, abortion needs here, and that's going to be an issue as well. And I think the male will want to employ, because the person that's good at fine, and the family is why I think that is definitely more
Well, I think it's, you know, great that you're concerned about these issues. I want to say I don't think there's any doubt that I don't think there's any question that more men are pro-choice than women. I mean that I have no doubt.
I actually just
Thank you.
.29% of women are pro-life. Saying that this is a feminist perspective, I find to be almost questionable because essentially you're asking women to bear the burden of the failings of society. And a lot of the times people are on the pro-life platform, they're speaking alongside people that don't believe that we should be supporting people. So I find that it's interesting perspective, and I haven't heard it before, so and I appreciate it because this is something. I also have an issue with the breast cancer situation in the fact that women that don't have children have a higher chance of getting breast cancer. So does that mean that more women should be having children? Is that what you're saying? I mean,
No. I'm saying that that's just a medical fact. As a matter of fact, a study told us that they use with Catholic nuns. Okay? Catholic nuns have a higher incidence of breast cancer because they don't have children, and that is because the loss of protective effect. And again, this is something that even the American Cancer Society disputes whether an abortion directly causes something that would be breast cancer. This is about the fact, the medical and biological reality that before pregnancy, there's undeveloped breast cells, and then throughout the pregnancy, those hormonal levels allow for the maturing of the cells into the mammary gland, for breastfeeding. That process of the maturing of these cells makes them less likely to cancer, uncontrolled growth. Okay, that is called a loss of protective effect. So the fact that you are pregnant, whether it's unexpected or not, means that if you continue with this, you will have a decreased risk of breastfeeding. And so by cutting that off, they have found that you could double your lifetime risk. And again, that's something that women should be informed of. But in most states, they're not. We're all wearing the pink ribbons, but why can't we talk about the medical facts that are very inconvenient, as everything is in a democracy. And regarding the fact that you're perhaps defending that I call myself a feminist, I'm a summa cum laude graduate of a finance program. I was the managing editor of the Loyola Law Review. I worked for the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court. I have started and sold several businesses. I have 4 teenagers. I am very involved with their schools and in public policy. Okay, if that's not a feminist position, tell me what is.
I agree with that.
And I'm not unusual. There are many of us working around, but not all of us get the chance to stand in front of a law school and make a case.
Absolutely. I'm not questioning whether I'm personally. It's more the argument that this is a feminist sort of decentralized issue by asking women to not have a choice whether or not to have an abortion because of surveillance of men in their lives and society to support them. But if you can't have
I think I've answered that, and I think it is also an unsupported assertion that people who respect the unborn child don't respect getting help for women. Okay? That is a stereotype. It is a straw man. Okay? The people that help us get the funding for women who are trying to choose pregnancy, to have a child rather than abortion, are on both sides of the aisle. We work with Republicans, Democrats, Independents, people who have wives, sisters, daughters. You know, we all have women in our lives, and of course it should be supported. But we shouldn't create, we have to watch how we do that. We craft policies, like she said, to where we are not allowing men to completely usurp their role. How do you deal with men who won't pay for it? We know that men won't support their women, Professor Sir. There's judges, okay? And they court impose support. They will garnish your wages, okay? There are ways to do this, and it has been done, and it will be done. They will be put in jail. That's right. Why is it that this gentleman gets to go out to sunset riding his motorcycle with zero responsibility?
I mean, first of all, some men don't have the ability to pay, right? You can throw them in jail, it's not going to give them any money, right? And in this country, we have a serious problem with the under-enforcement of child support, regardless of these measures. Obviously, I support measures to try to encourage people to pay, but the idea that it's all going to work out for an abortion, I think it's very naive. I just want to say that the protective effect thing, that you only get the protective effect if you have if you carry a pregnancy to term, and whether you have an abortion or you don't have a pregnancy at all, as in the case of the Catholic nuns, it's the same. There's no increased law protective effect from having an abortion. So it is the only way that can affect this debate is if you want to say women ought to have more children. That doesn't even have anything to do with abortion, right? That's just saying, you know, to protect against breast cancer, we should have lots of children. But there could be a lot of reasons not to do that. And I think, you know, in terms of the feminist issue, right, I think it's absolutely true that this is not a feminist policy, and it is not a stereotype. If people should look, if you think it's a stereotype, look at just one example. Jean Reese Travell is the person in 2000. She wrote a book. She documents her study of abortion policies across the country, and it's well documented that states that have official policies, I'm not talking about individual efforts that are important, the politicians that oppose abortion and enact laws that make it harder to get it, do not support policies, and their state policies reflect it, that support women when they do want to have children. It's just a fact.
That should be dropped. And that should be
yes, and we agree on that. And I think contraception is another example. It's something that we ought to have common ground on. And we support contraception.
If you want to have a debate on contraception, we can do that as well. I used contraception myself. When I was in law school and in the first year of my marriage, I used contraception. Okay? But I found that for me, the increase in the hormones, and I believe in the natural holistic lifestyle, but those increase of hormones were resulting in bad effects on my life. And the relationship with my husband was also affected. Okay, so I chose not to use birth control. Okay, but I can also tell you this: for my fourth child, I cried to 6 months. I prayed for a miscarriage. I'm ashamed to say. I had dreams of going to an abortion clinic. I did not want to be pregnant. I had 3 children. I was doing legal work. How am I going to do this? Okay? And when I tell you now that number 4, Mia, has balanced out and fulfilled my life in ways you cannot imagine. It has brought me joy that through suffering and tough situations comes the most unbelievable fruit. Okay? And so these quick, easy answers of death to what seems like a problem at the time is most times robbing women of a love that is so fulfilling you cannot imagine, robbing them of that.
Yeah, you know, I don't usually like to bring this up in abortion debates because I really don't think it's a huge issue at all. I have some children now, but they're also teenagers, so and I just feel so privileged that I had access to contraception, that I could plan my pregnancy, that I had the resources to to provide for child care if I could continue my career, that I had a supportive husband. Not everyone has that, and it's not to say that you would struggle to raise your children, and I struggled to raise mine too, but I was never intrigued by raising them, especially when I know there are so many women who face far, far more dire challenges than I was, that don't have a supportive partner, that perhaps are a teenager, who live in abject poverty, that have other children that they're trying to support and simply cannot afford another one, and might want to have one later.
Yeah, actually, on my question about the access to power and privilege in our society right now, you mentioned that the abortion rate should be less in the democratic process. However, in the U.S. Senate today, out of 100 members, there's 17 women. Some of them are women. In the House, out of 535 Congress people, only 61 are women. Only a handful are people of color. In the whole history of the United States Senate, only 600 African Americans, only 100 of African American women. So you talk about leading to the democratic process. The democratic process itself is not yet democratic. So for you to say that women are, and to use like precedent on the presentation and proceeding, I have no connection to these white upper class women in the 1800s who are also opposed to immigration, who are also opposed to African Americans having the right to vote. So I think, I don't know, I think, even the democratic process is also very manageable.
Well, you may be surprised to know that one of the biggest advocates of all politics that I was listed here is Senate President Sharon Boone, who is an African American Democrat. Okay, we work with African American Democrats across the country. The fact that there is such a small percentage of women in the House and Senate, I agree. I would like to see more. But guess what? Sometimes women, when they're making choices about their career path, will choose their family first, at least for a time, just like this O'Connor did. She raised her family for 20 years before she went back into politics and running for judge. We can make decisions, and you're going to see a disproportionate of males in these power structures often because women are choosing to spend time with their families, and we should not have to apologize for that. We should not. What I have advocated for, and my law firm advocates and puts into practice, is that women who have families and who want to have a voice in social legislation, law, medicine, science, whatever that might be, we have to demand and not apologize for the fact that we can work from home. Okay, I have done my whole, I've been a lawyer for over 20 years, and civil rights for the first 5 or 6 in an office. But then I went to my boss and said, I've got something to bring to the table, but I've got, a 2-year-old and 4-year-old. I'm going to work from home. If you see the quality of my work going down, you let me know. I'm going to get my hours in. I'm going to get the job done. But there's ways to address it, so we can have that fulfilling life of that we both know is parenthood, but also have an expectation and a demand in society that we can lend our voice and our talents in a way that we don't have to choose our children over our careers. We can have it.
But I mean, you talk about choice in certain that context, but then your position in abortion really leaves only one option, which is to treasure motherhood and parenthood. What if I don't want to do that? I don't have that value. I don't believe that being pregnant and raising a child is one of the most important things that will happen. My priorities may change. So why would we talk about choice in the context of career and life, and then limit me to no choice whatsoever in terms of my value about what I do, what I do in terms of my fertile youth?
Well, you do have choices. One of the things, if as a profession, I do take issue with the fact that women fail. If becoming pregnant or being a mother is a failure. I know you didn't mean it like that, but if you fail in your attempt to not be pregnant, and you do have a choice now, what is the choice? Well, adoption is a choice. You don't have to be a mother and raise such opportunity. Does the law in certain cases require me to do things that I don't want to do, like not beat up my mouthy 16-year-old, you know, when I really want to beat up my mouthy 16-year-old. The law, in recognizing that we are a civilized society of human beings of equal dignity and value, is going to put us all in situations where there are restrictions on what we want to do and what our goals are and how we get there.
Well, I mean, I can't put much more eloquently than all of the things you said. I completely agree with that. And I think that we shouldn't be doing that. I mean, some of the countries, we shouldn't do that at all. And I think it sort of gets back to, well, we have choices, you know, if we become pregnant, our choice is to have childbirth and then give your child up for adoption. Having been through childbirth, I'm very discouraged. Imagine giving them up for adoption. You know, I think that would be so much more traumatic. And to me, you know, of course I'm not going to abandon my children and beat them up because they're a person, right? And I see them as different from a fetus. If I can have an abortion in a person that's pregnant, I'm not going to feel the same way as I am about giving a child up for adoption, or you know, or dealing with one of my living children. So I think again it gets back to the question of not just the moral status of the fetus, which I think, you know, this debate has really demonstrated that it really isn't about that, but how we view women and women's responsibility. And I think the idea is that, you know, the sort of implicit message there is, well, don't have sex. You can live your life. You don't have to be a mother, but don't have sex. Because I don't want you to have contraception. I don't support that. And I'm not paraphrasing you. I don't know exactly what your policy position is on abortion, but, you know, most anti-abortion rights activists don't support and politicians don't support contraception. So the idea is that the only way that you're going to not have children is to either be very good at the rhythm method or not have a question about a lot of false positions.
Yeah, what are the medical risks for people engaging and those procedures where they don't want to have children and operating you know, second year? Is there significant risks that you're just coming out? Or I don't know. Anyone who knows that.
Well, I mean, I think the risk of people engaging because maybe surgery or is that what you're asking?
Well, we can get the statistics on that, but I can tell you that having an abortion is room for surgery as well. And
Outpatient surgery. I mean, it depends on the stage.
Yeah, my question is my question is Ms. Borgmann. I'm for choice, so what troubles me about your position is there's this assumption that the democratic process was too stupid to make the right decision, that like people who cannot make a decision whether society should allow abortions or what kind of restrictions they should have. You know, I think in a democracy, I think you have to, you know, someone who has like a really bad sickness go to the Supreme Court and say, hey, I expect the government to pay for this or pay for that or for this. Shouldn't, as a society, we get to decide, like, make that choice? Because I feel like your position, just limits choice, it doesn't allow people to have their voice heard, and that kind of troubles me. And you judging that question. I know Bordlee is trying to get you to talk about the democratic process, but you seem to be kind of judging it, not address why we can't make. Why can she make a decision? Like, why can't she go to the ballot and say, hey, this is the kind of restrictions I want, this is, or maybe I don't want any restrictions. Like, why can't you make that choice?
Right. I think that's a great question. I think that I don't think it should be left to the democratic process because I think it's a fundamental right for all the reasons that I said. So there are some things.
But the courts don't think that, though. Like, they statistically said that.
Well, the court under Roe did think so, right? And we're talking about Roe. So I disagree with the aspects of Casey that have left more of this to the democratic process. But even under Casey, states can't ban abortion because it's still protected under the Constitution. And like I said before, and that gets back to what I said at the beginning, which is that when we have rights that are sufficiently fundamental, we don't need it to the democratic process. We don't need it to the democratic process.
The government pays my medical expenses. Isn't that a fundamental right? I don't want to die. Like, if I get really sick, should I expect the government to pay for my medical treatment? Isn't that a fundamental right to live?
Well, that's a different question about whether.
Well, but isn't the same thing with the democratic process?
Can I answer your question? That's a different question about whether the Constitution compels the government to help people. I think that that's a laudable vision of a Constitution. It's not the way our Constitution has been interpreted. The way our Constitution has been interpreted is to forbid the government to intervene to prevent people from exercising fundamental rights. So what that means is that, as construed by the Supreme Court, the government doesn't have an obligation to help women, for example, a constitutional obligation to help women pay for childbirth or pay for abortion. That's left to the democratic process. But they cannot prevent women, they cannot actively act to prevent women from getting abortions, for example, by an abortion ban. Right? And you know, I mean, you could say the same thing about any one of a number of fundamental rights that are recognized by the Supreme Court. Do you think that we should leave it to the democratic process whether we should have slavery? Do you think we should leave it to the democratic process whether we should allow compulsory sterilization? I mean, right? All of the rights that are protected by the Constitution are ones that we deem so important that we don't want to leave it. We don't think it's right to leave it to the democratic process.
That's what we had in constitutional amendment.
Oh, we can have debate for the constitutional amendment. Sure. Right. Absolutely, and I would love to see democratic processes where people are actually talking about whether they agree that the fetus is a person and should be treated as such. I think very much that's the lens.
But again, you're right. Even Professor Katz-Sunstein, there's a list of people who support, pro-choice on abortion, who recognize that the Roe decision was illegitimate as a matter of our federal society, because unless something is granted to the federal system, obviously it is reserved to the states. Okay? And that is why when they had the chance to do the Roe opposition assisted suicide, they didn't do it. That's why even today, in the hot button issue of same-sex marriage, you don't see cases, you don't see the Supreme Court taking these cases. You see, some states doing civil union, some states doing it all together. Again, democracy is messy, but because everything that's important to us isn't listed in the U.S. Constitution because we have reserved it to the people, we have to recognize that the U.S. Supreme Court can't be taking one ideology over another. And we may or may not like that, but this is a federal society. We live in a federalist society, and we should act like it.
Yeah, I think we have time for one final question.
Thank you. So first, thanks to both of you for coming and all of you, because I think that it's also rare that people get together and actually discuss an issue, rather than just get together in groups of people who are like-minded and that agree with each other, which doesn't, in the end of the day, accomplish much. And to that point, something like, I believe 80% of Americans agree that late-term abortion bans are appropriate because they feel that somebody who is that far along in fetal development is close enough to be a person who is morally wrong in order to do it. They also accept the exceptions in the case of rape and incest and express the life of the mother, and there's certainly good moral grounds, that have been debated for centuries, not millennia, that had to work out those questions. But Dr. Borgmann, it seems that the way that you're framing the issue makes it more difficult to get to that 80% consensus. Because if you look at a situation like New York City, there was a statistic that came out in the last 4 weeks or so. Almost 50% of all pregnancies in New York City ended in abortion. And so it seems clear, in a city that has tremendous social welfare benefits, all kinds of safety nets, that abortion is used as an alternative to contraception. And it's not because contraceptives are not available in New York City. It seems that there's something else that's going on, that regardless of where you stand on exactly what is the status of the fetus in the first trimester, it would still be better if you're not going to bring the baby to term, if the person not get pregnant in the first place. And so by sort of framing it as if, well, if you don't want abortion, you don't want contraceptives, but here you have an example of where a city makes contraceptives available, and they said, the educational opportunities are there for sex education, and yet it doesn't work. So can you respond to that and to how this sort of, plays into the debate?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that you raised that I want to respond to. One is, I absolutely think that we should try to reduce the incidence of unintended pregnancy. Right? When we talk about the evil of abortion, usually I think what we really mean or should be talking about is evil of unintended pregnancy. Right? We ought to be preventing that. And so I think that we ought to promote more and better access to contraception, particularly for lone women who have more barriers to accessing it. So I absolutely support policies that effectively pregnancy. But it's also important to remember that, it takes two to create an unintended pregnancy. And so when we say that, that we sort of hate women as being irresponsible, and so they're somehow they haven't earned their right to an abortion, I think that that's incredibly misleading. And again, it's sort of this picture that paints women as guilty when they have an unintended pregnancy. And also the idea that abortion is contraception is just one of those myths that keeps being thrown out there. Like I said, women spent 3 decades of their lives trying to avoid being pregnant, and they do it pretty effectively. The abortion statistics do not evidence the fact that women are using it as contraception, and therefore they would be having a lot more abortions per woman, a lot more, multiple times more, if they were relying on abortion as contraception. But having said that, I think there is always room for improvement, and that they should try more. And just on the rape and incest exception, there have been debates about that in legislatures. And South Dakota, as an example, has recently twice tried, anti-abortion rights activists tried to pass an abortion ban in South Dakota by public referendum. So it wasn't even through the legislature. The public directly voting on whether to ban abortions, and they put in exceptions. The first time around, they didn't have exceptions for rape and incest. So in the exit poll, everyone said, I support an abortion ban, but there's got to be exceptions for rape and incest. So the second time around, they put in exceptions for rape and incest. And when it came down to it, when people, right, it's easy to say, these are the situations I support. When women and men had to look at those prescriptions and say, what do you have to do to prove that it's rape? How are you going to show that someone is the victim of rape or incest? People got uncomfortable with it, and they didn't end up supporting it. And South Dakota is one of the most anti-abortion rights. So, the Democratic caucus has shown what we want.
And the point is well taken that that New York, the New York vital statistics that came out last week, do illustrate what's happened across the country. That all of the promises and the proposed solutions have been implemented in the state of New York. Yet they have one of the highest rates of abortion. It's 40% of every single pregnancy is aborted. I believe 70% of them are in the minority community. And so again, that brings me back to my point that when you normalize, when you have a normative effect, that's what the law does. The law says this is a good option for you. Then it creates systemically the environment where abortion is the ultimate exploitation of women. Women can be used instead of love. And we haven't gone into a philosophical argument of what's the nature of sexuality, okay? But I think that and we have to come back to that, there's another talk, I guess, how love ruins romance. But when you look at sexuality as, a recreational sport, yes, you're going to have unintended consequences, but you're also looking at women, and that's when you see these mental health statistics, that when they are having sexual intimacy, we are hardwired to believe that we care for one another, that we are there for one another, that we would like to say yes to the dress. But why is it that 70% of the African American community doesn't even get the chance to say yes, much less the dress? Okay? Why is that happening? We need to address those questions, and we need to address it in the Democratic Party.
Well, thank you very much to both of our participants, and thank you very much everyone for attending. Our next Federalist Society debate will be next Wednesday. Also at 12:35, we'll be having a debate with the Association of Black Law Students on is affirmative action fair, and that will be with the Honorable Peter Kirsenow from the U.S. Civil Rights Department and Professor Shavar Jeffries from Seton Hall Law School. Then we're also going to have another event following day. Also, that will be at 12:35, bringing in Heather McDonald from the Manhattan Institute to talk about crime and policing. And we hope that you all can attend. We also have announcements from
Law Students for Reproductive Justice are meeting next Thursday at 5:30. If you'd like to get involved, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. You can include your email to let you know. We're also attending the rally in Lower Manhattan with Planned Parenthood next Saturday. If you want to go with us, just write it down on that paper and we'll give you more information. That's all. Thank you guys.